right. Well, thanks again to everybody who's joining us today for an exciting webinar. We are going to be talking about innovative financing approaches, specifically for the African solar industry. And I'm really happy to be welcoming two guest speakers today, Bernardo Lazo from Namene Solar and Saul Wainwright from the Sun Exchange. I'm really thankful that you managed to join us today, because I think it's a very interesting topic, and both of your companies are doing something really special in this field. And I'm really happy that you will be able to share this with the audience today. Before we get started, and because we have several listeners who are new to AFSIA, I wanted to share just a few words about AFSIA, explain a little bit what we do, what we are about, and then we will switch on to today's presentation. AFSIA is really meant to be the go-to platform for everything solar in Africa. The idea is really to promote the use of all solar solutions across Africa, large-scale projects all the way down to pico-solar systems, mini-grids, CNI systems. Really everything that has a solar component is home to AFSIA. What we do to promote the use, and we share knowledge and information, so you can follow us on our different social media platforms. And we are a membership-based association, so our members also get some specific services from AFSIA to help them in their business. We are based in Kigali, but we cover the entire continent. We have a wonderful team of local representatives who are covering some key markets, and our eyes and our ears on the ground to really be as close as possible to the news of the solar industry. As I said in the beginning, we cover the full industry: solar home systems, hybrid systems, concentrated solar power mini-grids, but also the different verticals, technical specialists, policymakers, legal consultants, EPCs, developers, you name it. It's all home to AFSIA. We offer several services. We have some very cool databases, which are really rich data sources in terms of companies or potential partners, in terms of projects. We have a database of close to 6,000 projects already identified. We provide some B2B matchmaking services. And as you can see today, we organize events and we do some webinars with a goal to inform as many people about all the cool things happening in the industry. Here's a snapshot of our current members. We have some founding members, very familiar names of the solar industry. And then we also have some partners, strategic and corporate members. You see this group is growing and growing. It seems to have quite some traction lately, and we're very lucky to have all those wonderful companies who trust us. In terms of activities, well, you can see some of the activities that we've done in the last 12 months. And today we are in January with the webinar on innovative financing for African solar. Next, beginning of February, we will launch our annual Outlook report, which is a country-by-country review of all the solar news. And then next month, the month after that, we'll have a webinar on solar needs water, which will as well be very interesting, covering all the applications that combine both solar and water. But without further ado, that's enough for a little word of introduction about AFSIA. You're here to listen from our speakers today. And first, I would like to welcome Bernardo. Bernardo is the Sustainability Director at Namene Solar. He's bringing more than 15 years experience in the carbon markets and climate change policy advisory. Before Namene, he's worked at Eco-Securities, mostly focusing on voluntary markets for carbon credits. He was also the Director of Partnerships at Gold Standard Foundation. And he has a Master's in Science and Environmental Technology from the Imperial College London. Bernardo, thank you very much for joining us. I'm really, really pleased to welcome you today. And well, the word is yours. I think everybody is very, very eager to learn about all your latest developments.
Thank you, John. First of all, thank you for the invitation, and hello everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. Today, I will talk to you about how carbon financing has been a tool to promote emission reduction projects of all sorts and technologies, but in particular how they can apply for the solar industry. No, the market has been operating for over 15 years now, but you know the solar projects have remained a bit of a niche of in terms of emission reduction projects. I'm going to present you the case of how to apply carbon financing for pico-solar technologies. Thank you, John. If you can pass to the next slide. So Namene Solar, we are a company that tackles, you know, or introduces access to solar energy from two fronts. On one side, we design and manufacture award-winning solar lights, with focusing on primarily super affordability and multi-purpose use. To be able to reach those that don't have access to the grid, and to give them first-time access to clean lighting, to replace kerosene. Next slide, please. And on the other side, we also develop solar projects for commercial and industry scale in the UK, but also in Africa. We have presence in West Africa, in Ghana, as well as in Kenya, and more recently in Zambia as well. Next slide, please. And the following. Yeah, this is an example of one of our our projects in Africa. Next slide, please. So the carbon market as a financing tool. The carbon credits that are generated from projects that reduce emissions, they help finance projects that normally wouldn't be economically feasible or commercially feasible without this additional or new revenue stream. No, whether it's selling electricity to a commercial buyer, this carbon finance can provide an additional revenue stream for every ton of CO2 that it's reduced or avoided by the project, no? By displacing energy that it's generated from fossil fuel sources. So it's a way to monetize the value of the carbon reduction of a project. It's mainly a results-based financing, which means that the monetization of this emission reduction happens after a project gets certified and after a project reduces these emissions, no, and they get audited and validated. I will go through the process in more detail later. And because of that, it often requires additional financing sources, whether it's loans or equity or grants to take those projects off the ground. And you know, the carbon revenue can help to either cover the part of the development cost or help to cover some of the operational cost of an installation, or simply to reduce the price of technology sold. No, for instance, in off-grid markets, it might help to reduce the price point at which consumers would access the product. The projects need to have a minimum scale in order to cover the certification costs, which are, you know, relatively high transaction costs. So I would say that for projects, they would need to minimally reduce 10 to 20,000 tons of CO2 per year. Next slide, please. So just in a brief description, the process for carbon financing starts with a design certification, which involves applying to one of the existing carbon standards to make sure that the project meets all the requirement criteria. No, it involves several steps that I will go into a bit more detail, but it's similar to any commercial PV to be able to get all the permits and approvals in place before the construction. No? The next step is when the project actually gets built and starts operating, and then the project starts to reduce emissions. No, if it's displacing, let's say, a diesel gen system or electricity produced by a mix of coal and gas and hydro, it will displace these emissions. No, which is determined upfront by a default factor depending on the grid of the country. And the next step is to actually conduct a certification, a performance certification, to see if the project is actually delivering as promised in terms of maybe the quantity of electricity that it's producing or the number of solar home systems that are being distributed, etc. No? And this is conducted by a third party through an audit. And at this point, then the project submits this audit to the standard body who issues the carbon credits. No, so for every ton of CO2, 1 carbon credit is generated. No, and this happens on a periodic basis, let's say on a yearly basis or longer, depending how often a project wants to monetize these emission reductions. No, and then the next step is the actual monetization, which means that a project agrees with a third party, normally a corporate, to buy these emission reductions to offset their own emissions. Let's say a large corporation that wants to compensate or offer carbon neutral products or services would buy these carbon credits. No, and then there is a loop of this cycle. No, that on a yearly basis or a periodic basis, this process gets repeated and enables to provide this additional source of funding to projects. Next slide, please. So, and how the carbon credits are calculated, this will vary from project to project, but the main principle is that you compare a baseline scenario, which is what it would happen in the absence of the project. Let's say if there's a need for more power generation, and whether the default option would be to be provided with a gas or with diesel, that would be the sort of baseline scenario, or in the case of solar lights that people use kerosene or candles. No, and the project scenario is actually the implementation of whatever it's the intervention. No, and then that's how the emission reductions are calculated between the baseline scenario and project scenario. If you can click please twice, just to show the comparison of these two scenarios. No, in one we have, in our case, baseline scenario of candles and kerosene lights that are being displaced by a solar light. So those emissions are reduced, and therefore they can be monetized or carbon credits. Just to give an example, a carbon credit, one solar light reduces 92 kilos of CO2 per year, according to a specific emission factor from a carbon methodology. For a grid-connected project, it will depend on what's the average grid emission factor, but it will vary between 0.2 to 1 ton of CO2 per megawatt hour. No? Next slide, please. So, but not all solar projects are eligible for carbon credit certifications. In the case of off-grid, in most cases, yes, if they are displacing, obviously, fossil fuels. So in the case of lights, solar home systems, and mini grids that are displacing other alternatives of fossil fuels, they are likely to be able to claim carbon credits. There's a specific methodology depending on the technology that needs to be followed and checked, but it's most likely that it is possible. It is obviously more complicated because many of these systems are not, connected to a meter, so it's difficult to quantify this, on an ongoing basis. So it needs to be calculated based on default factors, and sometimes conduct studies to determine that baseline. No. In the case of grid connected, if you can click, please. Mostly no. It used to be in the last 10 years or so that grid connected renewables were also able to generate carbon credits, because at that time renewable energy tended to be still more expensive than traditional fossil fuel generation, and therefore they would require this additional source of finance. But since last year, most of the carbon standards have introduced new rules that for new projects that are grid connected, they would need to either be based in least developed countries or under very specific circumstances that they are allowed to claim carbon credits. No, and this is mainly because in many situations in the last couple of years, due to the reduction in costs for solar, that now it's even more economically attractive to do a solar project than an alternative based on fossil fuels. No, even though some barriers and challenges remain, no, also on the financing side. But basically the projects need to demonstrate that they are additional. Next slide, please. So I'm gonna just briefly mention gold standard. It's one of the main standards in the voluntary carbon market, and it's considered one of the most reputable standards because it not only helps to monetize the carbon reductions, but also certify the contributions to UN Sustainable Development Goals. And the standard also introduces very detailed sustainable social and environmental safeguards, a very broad stakeholder consultation process, which helps to also inform the design of these projects, and to be very transparent and very clear on what are you monitoring and reporting over time. So it's not only at the time of the design, but also at the time of the performance that the project needs to be needs to be certified. That's the standard that we have chosen to use for our solar light projects. Next slide, please. So there are two main steps for the carbon credit generation cycle. One is the design certification. If you click one more, please, you will see that there are a number of documents that need to be prepared, baseline assessment and a stakeholder consultation. Then the project gets audited by a third party, and then it gets reviewed by the standard. And at that point, you receive the gold standard certification, which means that your project is able to generate carbon credits. No? And from that moment onwards, you can start the actual implementation of the project. In our case, it's the solar lights distribution, which need to be monitored. And after a monitoring period, let's say 1 year, it gets audited again based on this performance, and to make sure that the project meets the criteria defined at the design. And at that point, the credits, the VERs, the verified emission reductions, are issued, no, which then lead to the carbon credit sales and monetization of these emission reductions. Next slide, please. And I'm going to talk about the case of us using the carbon financing to scale up the distribution of pico-solar lights, and how small lights can lead to big scale and impact if you aggregate enough of them. Not only in terms of emission reductions, but also in terms of impacts to the livelihoods of people that receive these lights. Next slide, please. So our case study is about the distribution of pico-solar lights in Namibia. We have been working on this project for over a year, year and a half, in the design of the project, to ensure that the lights are well received, understood, and that we get feedback from users. These lights are entry-level solar lights, portable and multi-purpose, that are aimed to be distributed to households in rural areas, but also in peri-urban areas, in informal settlements, that they don't have access to electricity, that they would normally use either kerosene, candles, or in some cases torches as their main source, which tend to be expensive and polluting, no? And through carbon financing, we're able to offer the lights at a subsidized price, so that all the households, even if they live in extreme poverty, they can afford them without having to access a microcredit. And within a couple of weeks' time, compared to what they spend in kerosene or candles, they are able to pay for these new lights, no? And these lights are durable, and they're expected to last up to 7 years. So if you think of the accumulation of savings over that period, it's quite significant. So the project is designed to distribute up to 652,000 lights, and you might ask why that number, and that's because the carbon methodology limits to 60,000 tons of CO2 reductions per year, and that's the maximum that based on our lights that we can distribute. So that's the number that will allow to pretty much cover most or all the population in Namibia, which is a sparsely populated country, to provide them with clean electricity, no? So our aim is to really eradicate kerosene and candles for lighting in the whole country, no? By achieving deep and broad penetration of entry-level solar lights that with time might allow households to save money and to be able to then afford larger systems and eventually a mini solar home system, etc. No? And one of these highlights of this project is that this is the first gold standard project in Namibia ever certified for any project type. And we have a similar project already certified in Zambia, in 4 provinces in Zambia, which already started operations and distribution. So this is a model that we have studied in detail, adopted based on our product line, and to make sure that we address the affordability barrier for people to access first-time solar products. You know? Next slide, please. So as part of the project design and planning, we did an extensive baseline assessment and stakeholder consultations to determine what do people use normally as for lighting in these rural areas, how much they spend, what are the issues that they have with this type of lighting that obviously leads to fires, fire hazards, and fumes. So the project aims to not only resolve the access to a brighter light, but also provide more study hours to children, provide better lighting, reduce emissions from kerosene that have obviously health impacts, and improve safety at night because the light is portable and can be used as a head torch. Next slide, please. So the project delivers significant contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals, which is something that it's required by gold standard, but in addition, these type of interventions provide, as I mentioned, not only access to clean energy, but also reduce emissions and contributes to reduce poverty by providing by reducing the expenditure on lighting significantly. No? and by providing also local employment through the distribution of the project. Obviously, to achieve these goals, we also needed to set a distribution process that was efficient, or that it's efficient, that we are able to monitor and track these impacts and be able to report them as part of the certification process, which is complex, which it takes time, but also brings more quality of data from the field, and allows us to better understand the needs and the impacts on the users, no? And obviously will inform us for the the development of further products or further services to these remote communities. Next slide, please. And our key success components is using the right product, which was informed very much by these stakeholder consultations and process and market research. The right distribution model to aggregate through working with schools and clinics to aggregate demand and awareness of our products, and also define the right team and partnerships, no, to also work with local partners to be able to reach those isolated communities, and last but not least, to have the right monitoring systems to track the progress and report the benefits. And then my final slide is, what are the key takeaways about carbon financing? One of them is that it can open doors to obviously financing, but also more visibility to projects, no? By interesting corporates and development organizations and maybe development banks in the activities that a company it's taking part, and that it's not only delivering, as I mentioned, clean energy, but other additional social and environmental benefits that are well quantified. But it's important that, before investing a lot of resources and time, to confirm whether your project is eligible under the current carbon standards. And the devil is in the detail. One really needs to understand those methodologies and those rules and standards. And therefore, I suggest also to rely on specialists, because they can save time and money. The other takeaway is that it's a long journey. It takes time to develop these projects. It takes persistence. There are ups and downs along the process. So yeah, just be persistent and take your time. Monitoring is key, because if you don't have data, you're not able to generate carbon credits, and therefore you don't get any money. So all the effort and time invested wouldn't be able to convert into funding unless you have the right monitoring. And finally, just keep an eye on the carbon market. It has evolved quite significantly in the last couple of years. It has started gathering more attention, and definitely more companies are offsetting their emissions, and they're seeking to become carbon neutral or become net zero. And that obviously drives demand and has also, increased interest on the supply side. No? But there are also changes in regulations and trends that might have an impact on how one can commercialize and monetize these credits. So I suggest to just keep an eye on the market. I'm going to leave it at that, and but thank you for your time. And back to you, John.
Thank you very much, Bernardo. Very interesting, and judging by the number of questions that we have already received, I'm not the only one interested. And before we move on and give the word to Saul, maybe I would like to ask you a very quick first question already. Question who came from Amit. Amit is asking if the carbon credit is potentially also okay for new mini-grid. You mentioned that carbon credit is good for off-grid applications, but is it actually good for any off-grid applications, or are there some nuances and some cases where they might not be possible to enjoy? You're still on mute. Yeah.
So in general, yes, for off-grid it is possible. You know, how many emission reductions you are able to claim and displace, no, will depend on what are you replacing in terms of what it's locally happening at the moment, or what it's planned to happen in the absence of the project. And each technology has each type of technology has a specific methodology that needs to be addressed and followed, not only to quantify these emission reductions, but also to qualify, to be able, if you meet those applicability criteria. So, and that's where I mentioned the devil is on the details. So in principle, I would say yes, mini grids are eligible, and there are some existing projects already being certified by the carbon market. There's not only the voluntary carbon market, but also the clean development mechanism, which it was developed by the UN as part of the Kyoto Protocol. And that's the main source of methodologies for carbon emissions. So, and there are a few examples of projects that have solar home systems, and some of them that have mini grids that involve carbon financing.
Thank you very much for clarifying this, Bernardo. As I said, there are many more questions, and before we move on to Saul's section, I would like to remind everybody who's participating today, if you wish to ask a question, please do so through the Q&A option, which you find at the bottom of your screen in the controls. And if you please avoid to do so in the chat section, because it will not be recorded, unfortunately. So if we don't get a chance to address your question today, we will get a second chance to do it later on after the webinar, but only if you have asked your question through the Q&A section. So please do so. Thank you very much. Moving on, second speaker of the day, we are welcoming Saul Wainwright from the Sun Exchange based in South Africa. Saul is the CFO at the Sun Exchange, and he's been working for a long time in the Silicon Valley before coming back to South Africa. Mostly working in finance and fintech. And as a result of all these different experiences in the Silicon Valley, he's joined the Sun Exchange and is now in charge for managing global risk, compliance, and finances at the Sun Exchange. And he holds 2 degrees, one from Berkeley in the US and one from University of Cape Town in South Africa. And without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome Saul, who will tell us a little bit about how the Sun Exchange works and what makes it so special. Saul, very pleased to welcome you, and the word is yours.
Thank you so much, John. Well, I don't know that I need to introduce myself. I've already been introduced, so we can just skip right on to the next slide. So people-powered solar finance, that is, I'm here to talk to you guys about that. And I'm going to walk you through how our Sun Exchange marketplace platform works and talk about some of the different stakeholders, and then walk through the actual methodology that we use to come up with our financing. Next slide. So meet Alana. Alana is a future solar asset owner and a clean energy enthusiast. She lives in Toronto. She recently graduated with a degree in environment and business and works at a clean tech company. She knows clean energy plays an important role in the world, and she would love to go solar, but she has student loans to pay off and is living in a small apartment and doesn't have enough money nor enough roof space to install her own solar power plant. Not to mention, Toronto is not very sunny. Next slide, please. Meet Wendy. Wendy is our future solar energy consumer, or otherwise known as an off-taker. Wendy lives in Cape Town. She's a science enthusiast, an award-winning teacher, and a prominent education leader in the Western Cape. And she cares deeply about creating a better world for her students and preparing them to be responsible and conscientious leaders of tomorrow. In her role as principal of Protea Heights Academy in Cape Town, Wendy has dreamt of having the school go solar. But as everyone knows, schools operate on tight budgets, have very limited access to solar financing and other capital means. Next slide, please. Meet Sun Exchange. We were born here in Cape Town in 2015, and we provide a marketplace that connects those future solar asset owners with the future solar energy consumers. Through Sun Exchange, both Alana and Wendy are able to go solar easily and affordably. It all happens on our platform. Next slide, please. We have done over 35 different solar projects, schools, retirement communities, small businesses, and larger agricultural and nature parks. And we have connected tens of thousands of solar enthusiasts with these projects to fund these projects on our platform. Next slide. So how does it work? The first step is we identify a potential energy consumer, such as Wendy. We then go and identify their site, and we evaluate their site. We look at their energy demand, when they consume the energy, daytime versus nighttime load, how much they're paying for energy, whether it be a combination of diesel generated and grid tied, or are they completely off grid and reliant purely on generator power. This data that we gather using third-party tools and in-house financial model, we put all this data in to our model, and out of that spits a kilowatt hour rate that we will charge the energy consumer for their solar energy, the cost of funding that project, the total cost of operating and maintaining the project over the 20-year lifespan, and the total cash flow to the different stakeholders, so the cell owners and Sun Exchange. We then take that information and we put together a proposal, and we go back to Wendy and we say, hey, Wendy, we believe we can solar power your school for a 20-year lease, or otherwise often referred to as a purchase in power agreement, but it's not quite the same in our scenario. And in that proposal, we offer them a kilowatt hour rate that has predetermined escalation, so typically CPI plus 1 or 2% over the 20-year period. Protea Heights is also able to buy that power plant at any point during that 20-year term at a predetermined price. So the price is in the lease and states 5 years in, you can get this power plant for this much, 10 years in for this much, and it depreciates over the 20-year period. Protea Heights doesn't have to make any upfront payments, doesn't have to invest any capital in the project. Sun Exchange will design, build, operate, maintain, and bill for the power plant. So for the energy consumer, all they have to do is worry about whether that kilowatt hour rate is cheaper than what they had been paying previously. And in almost every instance, it is. Otherwise, the project is not viable. So we typically come up with a kilowatt hour rate that is between 20 and 60% lower than their current tariff rate that they're paying for daytime usage. Once we've got that proposal approved and Protea Heights has signed off and said, yep, we're down with this, we then prepare our crowd sale, which is taking that project and putting it onto our marketplace platform and opening it up to our global community. We have a global community in 170 plus countries, 20,000 plus members who are willing to buy and fund solar power projects. So how do we price our projects for our solar cell buyers? We take the total cost of building the project and we divide that by the total number of solar cells that will be installed on the rooftop. For example, let's take the project at Protea Heights, and for argument's sake, we say that it is going to require 100 solar panels to produce sufficient kilowatts for their project. We then know that each solar cell has each solar panel has 72 solar cells in it. And so we now know we have 7,200 cells to sell. The power plant costs 720,000 Rand. I'm doing this all for easy math. So now you can sell each solar cell for 100 Rand and you will raise 720,000 Rand. That is enough to build the entire project, for Sun Exchange to make its markup, and for the plant to be sufficient to meet the demand in the proposal. We then publish that on our website. You can go to sunexchange.com, log in and look at our projects, and you can select this project, Protea Heights, and click on it, and it will give you the option to buy as many solar cells as you like at 100 Rand a cell. And there will be an information pack that tells you what kind of cash flows you can expect from that solar cell over 20 years. That is what the solar cell buyers, actually, that's the incentive for them, right? So they come, not only do they have the incentive of helping a school reduce its power costs, reducing its carbon emissions, offsetting their carbon emissions, and owning a part of a solar array, but they actually will earn a rental income from that solar array for 20 years. Typically, the return is around 8 to 9% on an annual basis, and can change depending on how we account for carbon credits and depreciation in that. And I can talk a little bit more about those if there are some questions about that. We basically, by the end of it, we guarantee that the price of our solar cells guarantees the solar cell buyer makes a return, the energy consumer saves money, and Sun Exchange makes money, and the EPC makes money. So in our model, it's a stakeholder win-win-win scenario. People can purchase our solar cells using credit cards, cash, wires, EFTs, and Bitcoin. You can also earn your rental income either in Rands or in Bitcoin. One of the great things about Bitcoin and one of our innovations in taking advantage of this new payment method is that we can accept micro payments and make micro rental distributions without incurring massive banking charges, which would make our model very problematic. So we are able to send somebody $10 worth of value without having to pay $25 to send them that $10. Once we've successfully raised the money for the project, we build the plant. Once the plant is built, it starts generating electricity. We monitor it and we bill the energy consumer on a monthly basis. And we then distribute that rental income to the cell owners, taking a slice. So Sun Exchange makes money on the original raise for finding and developing the project. And we make money on the residual cash flows of the project through maintaining and operating. Sun Exchange also provides the insurance for all of the projects, and we build up reserves to replace inverters and solar cells should they fall outside of warranties. Typically, they are covered by warranty. We are in the process of registering most of our projects with a third-party carbon credit facility, and this will become part of our returns to our customers. We are also investigating and putting together abilities to sell depreciation and give some of that return to the customers if they don't claim the depreciation themselves directly. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for people like Alana who own and lease solar cells through Sun Exchange? It means you can easily go solar even if you don't have much money and don't own the roof space. Alana is able to offset her carbon footprint and actively participate in the global push to clean up our energy systems and combat climate change. The important thing is that this allows people that live in parts of the world where they cannot realize the advantage of solar in their own location to help offset the carbon needs around the world and still benefit from that. Next slide, please. What about the businesses, schools, and organizations like Protea Academy, where the cells are installed? What's in it for them? So they pay nothing up front. There's no capital costs, and they see a reduction in their energy costs. There's no additional line item to their income statement, and the total profile of risk is reduced because typically we are replacing and reducing an already existing expense line on their P&L. Next slide, please. So starting with the single installation, at the beginning of 2016 at Stellenbosch Waldorf School, we've managed to power over 35 schools, businesses, supermarkets, retirement villages around South Africa, and are beginning our expansion across sub-Saharan Africa. We recently launched a project in Zimbabwe for a large fruit exporter and are in conversations with companies in Namibia, Botswana, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. We currently have over 19,000 members in over 168 countries. We've produced over 3.6 megawatts of clean energy and offset over 2.7 tons of carbon thus far. We imagine a world where every person can own enough solar cells to fully offset their own carbon footprint, where our collective action can unlock the economic, social, and environmental benefits of solar power for all. Next slide. So join us. We believe people-powered solar is the key to a sustainable future. And my final slide, our URL. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saul. Very interesting, and same a lot of questions as you were presenting and introducing what you do at the Sun Exchange. So I anticipatively feel bad because I already know we will not be able to address all the questions, but I'll go very fast. And I thank you, Saul and Bernardo, to try to keep your answers short as well, so we can take as many as possible. I know it's not always possible, but let's give it a shot. So first question to you, which are actually two questions, one from Tilana and one from Rafael. Is there a minimum size of the projects that you would consider for them to make sense in your business model? And then the other question is, are you developing all your projects yourself, or are you working with a third party to actually source projects that you would then further develop?
So in terms of minimum size, we have done projects down to, I believe, our first project was about 25 kilowatts, which is typically too small. I would say we sit around 65 kilowatts and higher. But really, it's about making the economics of the project work for all stakeholders. We don't necessarily have a hard set minimum. And it's the same when we go up to big sizes. It's also about what capacity our funding community can handle. Sorry, what was the second question, John?
Are you developing all the projects yourself? Are you identifying them, or do you work with external partners? I'm guessing the question is coming from a developer in another country that you might be considering, and you're wondering about potential partnership.
Yep. So we don't develop them on our own. We work closely with our EPC partners. Often our EPC partners bring projects to us that have already been assessed, priced, and evaluated for viability, and we're one of their funding and financing options. We could go to Standard Bank, you could go to these banks, or you could go to Sun Exchange. So we are actively looking for partners on the African continent that can bring us pipeline. Good
to know. I'm sure this will interest several of our listeners today. Bernardo, I'm coming back to you with a question from Penny Jane. Is it possible to apply for carbon credits retrospectively?
Yes, this is a good question. In general, carbon credits or the standards allow a project to get certified up to 2 years after they started operations, or after they started the project. So there is a window of opportunity for projects that, you know, they have been recently being developed or implemented, or if you're halfway on a project development, you can still consider it. But there are some additional requirements to meet those criteria. For instance, you need to do a stakeholder consultation that meets the standard requirements in case you haven't done one, no, or tick a few additional boxes. But yeah, you can claim carbon credit retrospectively, but not like for the last 10 years, no? It would be restricted from the moment either the project gets registered or it started operations within the last two years.
Very good, thank you very much. Another question still for you, Bernardo. A question from Rowan, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, and a similar question from an anonymous listener. Is there, there is an understanding that you really need like a super large volume of pico-solar or solar home systems to actually justify engaging in this carbon credit program, let it be from Gold Standard or another kind of program. Could you give us an idea about how much the setup cost is to set up such a program, and is there such a thing as a minimum number of solar lights or solar home systems to make it worth your while?
Sure. I mean, this is a quite relevant question, and that's to some extent why the solar market has remained a bit niche, no? Because the carbon yield per megawatt hour generated or solar light, it's relatively small. So it works mostly for entry-level solar lights, and I can show you an example of our light, which is quite small and portable. And we worked into manufacturing something of high quality, but also quite affordable, in order to have an affordable light that, with aggregating larger volumes, we can make a project work. That's for what in the carbon market it's called a small scale project, which is up to 60,000 tons per year. There are options to do micro scale projects, which is 10,000 tons per year. So it's 6 times smaller. And those projects have slightly different rules that are simpler to certify and a bit more cost effective. So even smaller scale projects, let's say if you're distributing 10,000 products or something like that, it can still work, no? Because we're going into the more entry-level spectrum of lights, we are looking for larger volumes, because as we mentioned, our company mission is to eradicate kerosene. So we want to enable all the households to afford lights, no? But it is a matter of looking into the details of each carbon standard and technology, and whether, for instance, for a solar light, 92 kilos per light per year, would that be enough to justify the transaction cost, no? One carbon credit can be sold anything between $2 to $15, no, depending on the client and the type of credit, no? And you need 1 ton of CO2 for creating 1 carbon credit. So I think each company needs to do their numbers and see, which sort of model works for them to aggregate and make it economically feasible, no? So I would say, just as a conclusion, that it's not a carbon financing solution for everyone. It might be for specific technologies and a specific type of projects, and those that are able to aggregate. For instance, if you are doing a large program of several mini grids, and you can aggregate them into one, they can apply together as a carbon project, for instance, no? or yeah, several smaller sites, no, to make it to cover the transaction costs.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Next question. I believe it applies to both of you, but I will ask the question first to Saul. You are playing an intermediary between different parties, and to make sure that everything remains totally transparent and that everybody is satisfied with the projects. I assume there's a lot of tracking and compliance systems that need to be put in place just to make sure that everything remains well monitored. Do you use a specific tool for this, third-party tool, or has it been developed in-house? How do you actually manage to keep that full transparency on your projects for all stakeholders?
Well, in the instance of our solar power plants, we don't have our own technology. All the most inverters come with a monitoring technology that we utilize, and we try to keep the type of inverter standard so that we can interact with the same set of software, and we report that information to our off-takers as well as our cell owners, so they can see at any time how much energy was produced, consumed, and they already know what the rate is and what our deduction is. So it's actually, from our point of view, it's quite clear and simple. I think, you know, for Bernardo, it's probably more complex, where you've got carbon credits as an integral part of the model. That's just my guess.
Well, let's ask Bernardo. How do you deal with that compliance and tracking of the performance of your systems and the carbon credits that are associated with them?
Yeah, I mean, depending on each technology that you implement, the requirements to monitor vary. In the case of solar lights, you don't need to monitor the performance of each light. You do sample surveys, and based on those sample surveys, you determine what's the operational efficiency of the lights, for instance. But we do need to record the name and location and contact details of every end user of the light. So that's a significant task in hand when distributing thousands of or hundreds of thousands of lights. So we're moving into creating digital tools and using apps that can enable all the sales agents on the field to be able to track that information, collect that information from the beginning, and track if a light is not functioning and has been replaced, that gets registered, and that information ultimately will be audited by an auditor to generate the carbon credit. So data and information for us, it's key. But in addition, although it's heavy on the project operator, it also brings a wealth of data and understanding of what's happening on the projects, and in our case, what are consumers buying and where are they buying, etc. No? So it helps to understand better the needs and the requirements of customers, no? And in this case, entry-level customers that hopefully in 10 years' time they will be fully familiar with solar technology and have a much larger system on the roofs, over the roofs. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bernardo. I'm looking at the time. I'm conscious about time. I think we have gone a little bit over the original time, but we have a lot of questions, so we'll take a few more. And I thank you already in advance for staying with us. I have a question again applying to both of your businesses, I believe. It's a set of questions from Musuape, from Carl, from Luis about geography. You both, on the Sun Exchange, you provide an online system connecting people all over the world, literally. So the question is there a geographic limits to your activities? Musuape is asking specifically, does your model apply to Botswana? Luis is very interested to know when you would be started in Latin America, because he's out there and could be interested. So that's first question for Saul. And same thing for Bernardo. My assumption would be that especially in Africa, there is needs for pico-solar lights. But I prefer to ask you the question, is it applicable in all markets, or are there some markets where for some reason your model does not apply? Yeah, Saul, maybe first.
Yes, in terms of the geographic markets, we are focused specifically on emerging economies that are also in the sunniest parts of the world. So typically Sub-Saharan Africa and South America is definitely on our list. Expansion is limited only by pipeline and internal resources to enable the logistics of that expansion. We have great interest in pursuing that, and as part of our big investment round that we received last year is a Pan-African expansion. So there's no specific country that's off limit in Africa. The main reason we don't pursue a market is really the cost of capital. The cost of capital is low. It doesn't really make sense to many businesses to go with our model, because you kind of get squeezed between the cost of capital and the kilowatt rate that they're paying. So we don't look at the US market, for example.
Thank you very much. And what about you, Bernardo?
So in our case, although the model could be replicable in many other geographies, we have focused on those countries that have a low penetration of electrification in rural areas, particularly. It doesn't need to be in rural areas, but they tend to be the ones that don't have access to the grid. The limitation would be in countries where there is a high electricity penetration. Let's say in North Africa, that most of the countries are well electrified. You wouldn't be displacing kerosene or candles for lighting. No, you might be displacing the grid basically, or diesel. No, and then it will be a very different emission factor, and therefore it wouldn't yield potentially sufficient carbon credits to be justified. And the other aspect is that the project needs to be sort of additional, no? That you're really providing clean energy in places where it's not normally accessible. So the rules are also easier in least developed countries, and that's the case, for instance, in Zambia or Malawi, no? Or Ethiopia. No, in other more developed countries, let's say in South Africa, it would be a bit more challenging, because you need to demonstrate that the lights are indeed distributed in areas that they wouldn't be able to access the grid, no? Where the penetration of the grid is much higher compared to other sub-Saharan countries. So there are limitations, but there are still plenty of countries in sub-Saharan Africa and in South Asia that pico-solar lights can still make a big difference, no? And the interesting bit is, there's not a lot of bang for the buck in terms of the emission reductions per unit compared to, let's say, an efficient cook stove that can reduce up to 1 ton or more than a ton of CO2 per stove. But on the other side, it's quite a universal technology that can be deployed, across different geographies. So that's one aspect. And the other is that, an investment in a small solar light contributes relatively small in terms of carbon reductions, but contributes significantly to livelihoods, which is an area that it's important also for us as a company, and that we aim to eradicate energy poverty as well, and all the additional benefits that brings.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've got a list of relatively to the point and brief questions for each of you. So your first one to go. Question from Pierre-Antoine. How do you manage risks, and especially default risk from the off-taker? Because you're kind of in between. How do you protect people who are participating in the crowdfunding?
So the one area is, of course, we try to look for businesses that have a good track record and a good history. The second is that we have insurance that covers business interruption should the business stop operating for a while. We operate under the assumption that if a business were to vacate a building, another business would rent that building and take over the lease, as it would offer them lower cost electricity. And then because it's a movable asset, there is always the option to remove the asset and place it on a different structure and reprice that for a new location. So those are the ways we typically mitigate it. We haven't had any problems thus far. Knock on wood.
Thank you very much. Bernardo, Moritz is wondering, how did you calculate the 0.92 kg of carbon savings per light?
Yeah, I mean, we don't calculate it. It's a default factor defined in the carbon methodology. Other calculations, for instance, GOGLA, the Off-Grid Solar Association, estimates that the actual impact to replace kerosene, it's up to 350 kilos per year. So it's much higher. This calculation used in the methodology, it's conservative. It assumes like 3 hours and a half of a simple kerosene lamp burning, and assumes that it's being used the whole year. No? So it's a default factor that it's applied, which, you know, it makes it easier for the calculation, but obviously it would be much better if we could claim the 350 or 360 kilos per light, because then it will be a significantly higher financing per unit. No, if you have a light that has multiple lighting points, then you can claim 92 kilos for each lighting point. So if it's a light with you know, a lamp with 5 lights, then you can claim 5 times that, no, for each unit. So that helps compare it to a single point lamp. No?
Very good. Thank you very much. So back to you. I'm afraid of mispronouncing this listener's name. Reti or Retia is wondering about the ownership of the system. When is it being transferred to the offtaker? Is it being transferred ever? When and how does this happen? For how long? Is it Sun Exchange that retains the ownership during the project and the contract life, or is it a different structure?
Yeah, so that is at the heart of one of the pieces of innovation in our model. Our cell owners are actually asset owners. So they've bought a solar cell and they have then chosen to lease it to a project. A good example is somebody that buys an apartment in an apartment building, and it's facilitated through a real estate agent. We're that agent. They buy it and we say to them, hey, by the way, if you buy this apartment, we also know somebody that will rent it for 20 years for this amount of money. Are you interested? So that's basically what happens. Somebody comes, they buy the asset, and then they choose to rent it to Protea Heights Academy. That asset is theirs. They own it. They have tax depreciation rights and other rights are attached to that asset. The asset is theirs throughout. We place that asset into a trust here in South Africa that's managed by third-party trustees. And the asset will sit in there, and that trust acts as the leaseholder. So it signs and acts on the behalf of the cell owners. And the energy off-taker contracts with that same trust. So the trust sits in between the different parties, but the asset is never Sun Exchanges and it's never the off-takers. It's always the cell owners, of course, barring some of the infrastructure that sits around it. So the cabling, the racking system and whatnot would be Sun Exchanges, but it's a nominal value. It's like a R1 value that is placed on that aspect of the asset. So the important thing is people are buying a regular asset and they are choosing to lease it. We just went through a major review in the US, which has allowed us to open up our marketplace to US consumers, because it's being deemed that we are not selling a security, but we are just selling a good, which makes it very easy for us to market it and reduces the risk for all of us that are involved in it.
Very clear. Thank you very much. And then I'm just going to take one more question for each of you. I mean, I'm really conscious about time here. We're way over the schedule, but we've been bombarded with questions. Bernardo, it's a double question. How much savings is this scheme generating? Like, how much cheaper can you actually bring that pico-solar light to market thanks to this initiative? And would it have been possible to supply all those lights without any carbon savings?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the economics of the technology and of the distribution system and in the country. No, in some countries it might be more densely populated and the distribution might be more more cost effective than others. What we focus is on seeking to introduce a price point of the lights that can be afforded by any household, no, without having to save a lot of money. So, you know, I cannot speak in percentages of how much it reduces, because it will vary from project to project or technology to technology, no, or specific model even. But what I can say is that, yeah, it enables to make the distribution process more affordable. That otherwise wouldn't be, no, without any carbon finance. Yeah, we could still conduct a project, but maybe we would be selling them in cities, in peri-urban areas, and we wouldn't go really deep into rural households, no. So the project would end up benefiting people that maybe they just have rolling blackouts and they just have a spare light available whenever they don't have electricity. But really what we seek is to reach those that don't have access to clean lighting, no? And in order to achieve that in an efficient way, we just need to aggregate the volume and partnering with schools and clinics to deliver those lights to those that, you know, normally wouldn't have access to solar.
Really putting all pieces together to have the biggest impact.
Correct.
And then last question, Saul. I think I have an idea about the answer, but I really want to ask it because Maria was wondering, what is the least investment that somebody can make in one of your projects, and what would you recommend a first-time investor in solar to do?
So the average price of our solar cells is between $3 and $6 US. So it's a very low risk first time purchase. I'm not going to recommend, you know, but it's a low cost to enter into the project. And you can go to our website and they're differently priced with different returns and different impact and potentially personal risk profiles. So Zimbabwe versus retirement village versus a low income housing development versus school. Yeah.
Well, that sounds like very affordable and relatively low risk for somebody who would like to try it out and see how it performs. Well, gentlemen and everybody listening, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, I'm really happy that it was possible for you to join and for sharing a little bit about the work that you've been doing. I invited you to today's webinar because I've been following you for some time, and I found that you've been doing some amazing things, really some cutting edge developments, innovative ways of looking at things. So again, thank you for sharing a little bit about this with the people listening today. I wish you a wonderful afternoon, I will be following up with everybody who submitted questions and that we have not been able to address. I will share those with the speakers today. And of course, we will share the presentation. Please be in touch. I look forward to hosting you again in the next webinar, and I wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.